Alrighty, we're going to jump into the A3 variation. Let's go ahead and take a look at the PowerPoint slide. So A3 is called the Petrosian Variation, second most popular, played at 20% of the time against the Queen's Indian as whites move. First most popular was the G3 variation, with which we looked over, and also now A3. Okay, so for A3, white prevents bishop b4, and by doing so, he prepares the perfect developing move in knight c3. This variation did not really come under close scrutiny until the 1980s. The split of variations, however, is the same as after 4g3. Black has the classical reply, bishop b7, and the somewhat cheekier bishop a6. A third possibility is to change direction and play c5, giving the game a Benoni-like character. At first sight, this may look attractive for black, since after d5, his, quote, extra move, b6, creates the impression of being more useful than white's a3. But this is not really the case, and in practice, the straightforward e takes d5, c takes d5, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, and analogous to the modern Benoni, is hardly ever played. It is much more interesting for black to return to the bishop a6 motive by playing bishop a6. After queen c2, a position is reached that we shall take a closer look at in the variation of the bishop a6, since the identical situation arises via bishop a6, queen c2, c5, d5. So a3, bishop b7, and then knight c3. Let's look at d5. The strength of white's knight on c3 makes itself felt. Just as in many lines of the 4g3 system, black now has to take the advanced d5 into the account. This is why the simple developing move, bishop e7, dubious, is hardly ever played at master level. White replies d5, followed by e4, and obtains a comfortable space advantage. Now g6 is more subtle, because now black will at least have his bishop actively placed on the long diagonal in case of d5, bishop g7. This is an important and combative variation. Black challenges his opponent to execute his strategic threat and gets ready to fight against white's central position. Knight e4 is also quite popular, but for a completely different reason. This variation is very solid. By exchanging a pair of knights, knight takes d4, bishop takes e4, black reduces the tension. If white wants to fight for an opening advantage, he will have to sustain the struggle for control over e4. This is done either by the quiet e3, followed by bishop d3, or by the sharper knight to d2. We now return to 5d5. In this position, the straightforward c takes d5 is white's most important option. Black is then faced with a fundamental choice between the robust e takes d5 and the dynamic knight takes d5. In the former case, white will try to put pressure on the enemy position by bishop f4, g3, while black will normally move forward in the center with c5. This variation usually leads to a long, drawn-out struggle for small positional advantages. Knight takes d5, on the other hand, is likely to ignite a fight for the initiative. White may play queen c2, for instance, aiming to occupy the center immediately after e4. This forces black to react swiftly in order not to drift into a passive position. Yet the situation is also potentially dangerous for white, for his broad pawn front may turn out to be vulnerable if things go wrong. Bishop e7, e4, knight c3, knight captures c3, b takes c3, castle, bishop d3, c5, castle, is a characteristic follow-up, when black could try queen c8, intending not only to play c takes d4, followed by an exchange of queens, but also to meet the plausible reaction 12 queen to e2 with bishop a6. Generally speaking, exchanges are to black's advantage in this type of position because white's attacking chances are lessened while black's prospects of an advance on the queen side increases. Less direct, but equally well founded are queen c2, and also bishop g5, bishop e7, queen a4 check. The latter variation aims to disorganize black's position. Every single way of relieving the check has certain subtle positional disadvantages. These lines are less thoroughly investigated than the c takes d5 and require a talent for improvisation from both players. All right, let's take a look at the bishop a6 line. This unorthodox move has proved a great success against 4g3 and 4a3. It makes it harder for white to easily develop his pieces, and it also poses some concrete problems without taking undue risks. Nevertheless, the choice between bishop b7 and bishop a6 is largely a matter of taste. Which type of position do you want to play out, or which do you want to avoid? Queen c2. Now, 5e3 is well met by both c5 and d5, while knight on b to d2, which goes entirely against the spirit of a3, is usually answered by bishop b7, queen c2, and d5. The knight is simply not well placed on d2. Now, queen to b3 is more interesting because it preserves the option of playing knight to c3, but queen to c2 has the additional advantage of threatening e4, which makes it the most popular move by far. Bishop b7. Should black play d5 in this position? White simply replies, c takes d5, e takes d5, knight takes c3, when the knight on c3 will exert considerably more pressure on black's central position than in the above knight on b to d2 line. Black usually builds a scheme of development around the advanced c5. Bishop to b7 prepares his move, yet an immediate c5 is also not bad. The critical reply to this is d5. Black can now turn the opening to a kind of modern Benoni by playing e takes d5, c takes d5, g6. A strategy which is much more promising now than in the event of c5, d5, e takes d5, c takes d5, g6, as mentioned above. Since with the black bishop on a6, white cannot play e4 for free. He'll have to give up the right to castle. Another option for black is to win material for white's move. d5, natural as it is, does actually involve a pawn sacrifice, though after e takes d5, c takes d5, black cannot simply play knight takes d5, question mark, because of queen e4 check, winning a piece. Following, bishop b7, e4, queen e7, the loss of either e4 or d5 becomes unavoidable. This greedy variation has never been very popular, though. White plays bishop d3, knight takes d5, castle, when his leading development promises full compensation for the lost pawn. We now return to bishop to b7. Black has given white the apparently very useful extra move, queen to c2, for free, while taking two moves to place his bishop on b7. Why is this? Knight c3, c5. The point of black's previous move becomes clear. Since d5 is now a practically pointless pawn sacrifice, white has to find another plan. e4, c takes d4, knight takes d4. This is the fundamental starting position of most of the bishop to a6 theory. Though the position may look very good for white, optically, it offers black counter chances which are not to be underestimated. The moves knight to c6 and bishop to c5 immediately reveal weakness in white's position. His queen is not ideally placed on c2. D6 is also not bad. Black will curl himself up into a hedgehog type of position and intends to show up the supposed clumsiness of both A3 and queen to C2 in this type of position at a later stage.